Where were you in 1996? The Spice Girls had their first #1 with Wannabe, Independence Day launched for the first time in movie theaters, and Microsoft launched NT4, a server operating system with incredible features and capabilities. But fast forward 20 years to Windows Server 2016, and we're now entering the cloud era. And who better to talk to us about Windows Server 2016 and the historical look through all of the eras we've seen in Windows Server than a man that needs no introduction, Mr. Jeffrey Snover. Welcome, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good. So talk to us about Windows Server 2016 and how it fits into this cloud era.
Yeah, so I'm so excited about 2016 because really it's the first release of this new cloud era where we stepped back and said, what does it take to be successful? And then to have the courage to go make the changes required to be successful for the cloud. So that's sort of at two levels. One is Windows Server, of course, is going to run the fabric of the cloud. So that's all of our investments in software-defined everything. And then how do we be a great guest? How do we write great cloud applications using Windows Server to give people great agility and focus in on their applications versus the details of the system. So in both ways, Windows Server 2016 is fantastic for the cloud. It gives customers the ability to get the most out of their hardware resources and the most out of their people. It's an exciting release.
So bring us up to speed with how we've got here, though, because we've gone through a lot of eras to get to this new cloud era. So
indeed, Windows servers had greater durability than the Spice Girls.
No comment.
Okay. So, you know, around that time, we created, we've gone through sort of 3 eras, and the cloud is the 4th era. We started with when we took a great kernel, Dave Cutler's kernel, and we put a desktop experience on it, and then ran it on PC class hardware. It transformed the world. Prior to that, servers were the era of the high priests and the goddess of the technology world, right? They were the only ones who could buy, deploy, and operate a server. But now with Windows Server NT, now everyone could buy, deploy, and operate their own server. It deployed the world, and there was an explosion. Everyone was buying these servers, and there were so many that brought about, and so we call that first era server for the masses.
Nice.
And then there were so many of those, we needed to stitch them all together. So that brought about the second era. The second era was server for the enterprise, where we added Active Directory and group policy, and we were able to stitch together all the servers and all the clients into a coherent operating model. Okay, we added on to that .NET, and when we added .NET, whoa, put your seatbelt on. There was the line of business application explosion. Again, same model, where prior to that, line of business applications were done by the high priests of technology. And now with .NET, everybody could write their own line of business applications, mission critical, and then that then meant that Windows Server had to run them all. So that brought about the third era, the data center era, where we could take those LB applications and run them on very large scale-up servers, on scale-out servers. This is where we transformed our management system from one of a GUI and local GUIs and remote GUIs to automation with PowerShell. This was the technology that allowed the cloud era to be born. This was the technology that Azure used to build Azure, and then we've taken the tools and technologies, in some cases the actual code from Azure, and we've incorporated that into Windows Server 2016 to now make it available to everyone.
Awesome. So that was a recap from 20 years right through to now, and that brings us to Windows Server 2016.
Yeah.
But what are some of the key investments we've made in 2016 that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so it's important to note that each one of these eras has its own way of doing things, right? So again, back to the server for the masses. You walked up to the server to the masses, you had a keyboard, a mouse, you click, click, click. With the enterprise server, you did it remotely. And so each era, there's a distinct architectural changes to the operating system to make it great and fulfill the needs of that era. So too with Windows Server 2016, we have deep architectural changes to the server. In fact, in my opinion, these are the largest architectural changes since we started Windows Server.
I agree.
Okay, so first is Nano Server. Nano Server is a dramatic refactoring of the server, where you start off with the very smallest components, and then you only bring in those those additional components that you use, okay? So server and a desktop, that's like 8 or 9 gigabyte VHD. Server core is about 5 to 6 gigabyte VHD. Nano server is about 440 megabytes.
Wow.
It's crazy small. Very fast, boots up like that, very secure, very low attack surface, and very low resource consumption.
It's very efficient.
Yes,
Yeah.
just perfect for the cloud.
Excellent.
Okay, so next come containers. Containers are a new way of doing things. Basically, it's a way you can compose your application and then distribute them through repositories and just run them. It's a new operating model. And then lastly, it's a DevOps, what I call the DevOpsification of Windows Server. Really, if you take a look at DevOps, it's a new way of operating where you bring your operators and your developers together. And we needed some architectural changes to do that job great. So the first is we have a new installer, WSA. This is a purely declarative installer. In the past, we had installers that were largely declarative. There's a big difference. As soon as you have custom actions, there's a whole slew of scenarios that you can't really do, like offline deployment, offline servicing, et cetera, things that are critical for the cloud. We have a new way to configure systems with desired state configuration, where you declare how you want the system to be, it makes it so, and then it monitors that, and then we'll adjust it to make sure it's always in that state. And then you want to be able to test things. So we have pester and operational validation testing so that you've deployed things, now are they running? So we have a well-defined way to write and run those tests with pester. And then lastly, the ability to take those packages that you did with the installer and then put them in repositories and then get them.
Cool. So there's a lot of investments there. One thing you mentioned with Nano Server was reducing the attack surface.
Yes.
Now, that's obviously a key element of security, but talk to us briefly about some of the other investments we've made in security in 2016.
Yes, so we made a lot of investments. So we strongly encourage all the servers to have TPMs, and so this allows us to have a hardware-rooted trust chain so that we can do shielded VMs. So think about the shielded value proposition for a shielded VM is, I would like to take I'm a customer and I would like to take my VMs and run them on a service provider. But do I really trust that service provider? When I run that in my shop, I know the physical environment, I vet my employees, et cetera. And what is really my trust of the service provider? Well, with shielded VMs, you're able to fully trust them because their admin has no access to the VMs, right? They can completely do anything they want in that system, but they can't get at the VM itself. And so we have people very excited about that. We've picked up all of the security improvements for Windows client, and they're available. So Defender, for example, is now on by default on server. We have Credential Guard and Device Guard. Those are all available. And so I don't know if you saw, but recently the DoD, unprecedented, the DoD decided that they were going to go fully to Windows 10 in very short order. And why did they make this revolutionary change? It's because of the great security that Windows 10 client provides. Well, we're able to take all that and add to it the Windows Server features.
Awesome, cool. So a lot of stuff there, but you mentioned obviously Nano Server as a key component of infrastructure and fabric, which we touched on earlier, and obviously the app platform. But talk about a little bit more about those two layers, the infrastructure and the application platform for us in relation to Windows Server.
Sure, so I'm also leading the Azure Stack effort. So in the Azure Stack effort, that's exactly what we have. We have a Azure Stack, you'll be able to run Azure in your data center on your own servers. And there we use Nano Server to be able to be the fabric to run on the physical hosts. So that's specifically clustered hypervisor and clustered storage. And we have some networking roles as well. But that runs on the physical storage. Then that provides the fabric, and then tenants then run their workloads on that fabric. Now these tenants can be anything you want. They can be Windows, they can be Linux, they can be old Windows, they can be new Windows, old Linux or new Linux. But the best is with Windows Server 2016, because there we have the very smallest footprint. It deploys very, very quickly, consumes very few resources. Again, just flies like the wind.
Nice. So that's a a good look at 2016. We talked about a number of key areas there and a good historical look. But in terms of people getting started, we want to make sure that you check out the other resources on microsoft.com/Windows Server 2016 and download the evaluation. But all that's left for me to do. Thanks, Jeffrey, for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks.